You know, it's fascinating, isn't it? The whole dynamic between the US and China on trade, especially tariffs, it can feel almost counterintuitive sometimes.
Absolutely. We hear so much, but what's really happening, behind the scenes, or at
Hmm.
least what's one version of what's happening?
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into a very specific account. It's about the Trump administration's efforts, apparently, to negotiate tariffs with China.
And this is all based on a YouTube video transcript.
That's right. The source is a transcript from the Ring of Fire channel on YouTube. And the title, well, it's designed to grab attention. Trump begs China to call him to negotiate tariffs.
Okay, so right off the bat, that title signals a pretty strong viewpoint.
It definitely does. And as always, we need to stress this is one perspective we're looking at. Our mission today isn't to say if it's right or wrong, but just to unpack the claims made in this transcript.
Understand the narrative it presents, the sequence of events it describes.
Exactly. For you listening, it's about understanding this specific story and maybe what it implies, not necessarily accepting it as, gospel truth. We're analyzing a viewpoint.
Got it. So where does this transcript start the story?
Well, it jumps into this claim reportedly made by the Trump administration. They supposedly asserted that something like 75 countries were calling them up.
75. Wow.
Yeah, calling to make tariff deals, saying things like, you're hurting us, we need an agreement. 75 is, well, it's a very specific number, isn't it?
It really is. Especially in international relations, you usually hear broader terms or maybe specific named countries. That kind of precision, well, it does make you wonder.
And that's precisely the skepticism raised in the transcript. It highlights that the administration apparently didn't name any of these 75 countries.
No names at all.
Nope. Or any details about the supposed deals either. The transcript says they were totally silent on the specifics beyond the number 75.
Which naturally leads to the question, why the secrecy? If you have 75 countries eager to deal, you'd think maybe highlighting a few might strengthen your position.
That's a fair point. It does raise eyebrows. What strategic purpose could keeping all the names under wraps serve? Maybe domestic messaging, projecting demand.
Or perhaps there were other calculations internationally. The lack of transparency certainly makes it hard to judge the claim itself or what its real impact was intended to be.
Okay, so let's shift focus now to the country that this transcript really centers on, China.
Right, the key player in this whole tariff situation, according to this account.
The transcript argues China's economic weight, its impact on the U.S., is massive, and they'd already put the highest tariffs on U.S. goods. This sort of sets the stage.
And realistically, given the global economy, the U.S.-China trade link is incredibly significant. Actions by one definitely ripple through the other.
So engaging China on tariffs would seem like, well, priority number one from a U.S. standpoint, logically.
You'd think so.
And this transcript claims the Trump administration did try. It says there were multiple attempts to reach out.
To China.
Specifically, they were waiting for President Xi Jinping to return their calls to actually schedule a negotiation.
So the U.S. was initiating contact, asking for a call.
Yeah, the message described was basically, we want to set up a call between Trump and Xi to talk tariffs. Let us know when works for you, that kind of thing.
That picture, one major power actively trying to get another on the phone about such a big economic issue, it does say something about how necessary that chat was seen, at least from the U.S. side described here.
But this is where the story takes a sharp turn in the transcript. Instead of getting that call back,
They got something else.
China reportedly responded by slapping even more tariffs on U.S. goods.
Ouch. So no call, just more economic pressure.
Exactly. And the transcript really emphasizes this point, the U.S. outreach attempts. Never even got a return call, just silence and then this escalation.
That kind of response from China hiking tariffs, while apparently ignoring the outreach, suggests they had their own assessment of the situation, doesn't it?
It seems so. Maybe they felt strong enough economically, or perhaps they just had a different strategic game plan entirely.
Which leads into what China actually said, right?
Yeah.
Does the transcript mention their official position?
It does. It reports on a statement, allegedly from the Chinese Foreign or Finance Ministry, that was remarkably blunt.
How blunt?
They essentially said that even if the U.S. kept raising tariffs at the current levels, get this, it will no longer make economic sense and will become a joke in the history of world economy.
Wow. A joke in the history of world economy.
Yeah.
That is incredibly strong language.
It really is. It suggests a belief that the U.S. tariff strategy had kind of hit a wall, that it wasn't effective anymore.
It certainly signals deep skepticism about the whole approach from the U.S. side.
And it didn't stop there. The statement reportedly went on, quote, "With tariff rates at the current level, there is no longer a market for U.S. goods imported into China."
So basically saying you've already priced yourself out.
Pretty much. And then if the U.S. government continues to increase tariffs on China, Beijing will ignore.
Okay, so that sounds like a very firm, we're done engaging on this escalation path, like drawing a line.
Absolutely. It suggests they felt the economic impact had sort of plateaued for them, and more tariffs wouldn't change their behavior, maybe just hurt U.S. exporters more.
It really shows that complex dynamic, doesn't it? Between what a policy intends and how the economy actually reacts.
So picture the sequence according to the transcript. U.S. reaches out multiple times, gets silence, then gets hit with more tariffs, and then this really dismissive public statement from China.
Okay, so what happened next in this narrative?
Well, this is where the transcript describes a shift. After reportedly not getting that call from President Xi, the Trump administration supposedly backed down, that's the phrasing used.
Back down how?
By deciding to get rid of the tariffs on smartphones and tablets and computers.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
So removing tariffs on some pretty significant consumer goods.
Exactly. And the transcript interprets this pretty directly. It frames it as happening because China didn't engage and took that defiant stance.
So the interpretation is attempt outreach, get rebuffed, roll back some tariffs. Is that the idea?
That's the sequence presented, yes. Removing tariffs on those specific items, things with big consumer demand and complicated supply chains, could be seen as maybe trying to ease some domestic pain from the overall tariff situation.
And the transcript explicitly calls this a concession, following the lack of engagement from China.
It definitely frames it that way, which leads to the question the transcript implicitly asks. Looking at the series of events as described here, does it suggest the U.S. was negotiating from a position of strength?
Well, based only on this narrative. No, it doesn't really paint that picture. The repeated outreach, the reported lack of response, followed by a tariff rollback on key goods.
Right.
You could certainly interpret that as reflecting perhaps limited leverage in that moment.
And that ties into the overall tone of the commentary in the Ring of Fire transcript. It's, let's say, highly critical.
Right. The begging in the title hinted at that.
Yeah. They use strong language, characterizing the efforts as failing, saying Trump can't even get a phone call back, describing it like throwing punches but landing nothing but air.
So the commentary contrasts that image, often projected, of a really tough negotiator on China.
Exactly.
With the events as they depict them, which really highlights how different sources can frame the exact same international events so differently.
Absolutely. It underscores that perceived gap between the tough on China narrative and what this transcript presents as the reality, the U.S. seemingly backing down after being, well, ignored.
And it's crucial, like you said earlier, for listeners to remember this is one specific interpretation filtered through the lens of this particular YouTube channel.
Definitely. It's a viewpoint highlighting how unpredictable these international talks can be. Applying economic pressure might not always get the expected reaction.
Sometimes it leads to unexpected countermoves or strategic shifts from the other side.
So let's try and wrap this up. The core takeaway from our deep dive into this specific YouTube transcript is this narrative. The Trump administration tried to negotiate tariffs with China, was reportedly met with silence, then more Chinese tariffs, followed by a U.S. decision to pull back tariffs on certain electronics.
It's a portrayal that, at least according to this source, challenges the idea of the U.S. simply dictating terms in that trade relationship at that time.
Which really brings up important questions for anyone following this, right? What other information is out there?
Exactly. What other perspectives exist? Were there other diplomatic back channels maybe? What were the broader economic conditions in both countries influencing these moves? Looking at more sources is always key for complex stuff like this.
Absolutely. And thinking bigger picture, beyond just this instance. What does it mean if this kind of dynamic, one side seeking talks, the other resisting, becomes more common in trade disputes?
That's a really interesting question. What might it suggest about shifts in global economic power or political leverage? Definitely something to keep thinking about as these international relationships continue to evolve.